Everyone adored Marilyn Monroe, but no one really knew her. Behind the camera flashes, she was breaking under the weight of Hollywood's demands. She tried to show us the dark price of fame, but by the time anyone noticed, it was too late. A fragile start. Marilyn Monroe, then just Norma Jean Mortensen, came into life with almost no support system. Her mother, Gladys, was in no shape to care for her, battling severe mental health issues that made parenting impossible. Norma didn't know her father and had no stable home. Almost from the beginning, she was shuffled from foster homes to orphanages. She was almost like a package that no one really wanted to keep. By the time she was just 7, Norma had already faced a level of neglect and isolation that most people couldn't imagine. She had no family she could rely on, and nowhere that felt like a true home. And it wasn't just about constantly moving from one place to another. It was about survival. In some of these foster homes, she faced abuse and the harsh reality of an unstable childhood. By her early teens, Norma had lived in at least 12 different homes, witnessing firsthand the kinds of experiences that would haunt her for life. For Norma, these years weren't just difficult. They left deep scars. Even when she finally had moments of stability, they never seemed to last. She briefly lived with her mother's friend, Grace McKee, who introduced her to movies and the world of Hollywood. But just when things seemed to be looking up, Grace could no longer care for her, and Norma was sent right back into the foster system. Every time she thought she found a place, it was only temporary. She was uprooted and displaced over and over again. The escape route, a teenage marriage. Imagine being so desperate to escape your life that, at 16, marriage feels like the only way out. That was Norma Jean's reality. In 1942, she married her neighbor, James Dougherty. Not out of love, but because it was the only way to avoid returning to the orphanage or bouncing back into the foster system. This wasn't a fairy tale romance, it was survival. Norma wasn't looking for a soulmate, she was looking for stability. James Dougherty was 5 years older, steady, and safe, but he wasn't exactly a knight in shining armor. He didn't know much about her troubled past, nor was he really prepared to handle it. For him, Norma Jean was just a young girl in need of a home, and for Norma, marriage was a means to an end. As long as she was married, she could avoid the uncertainty that had defined her entire childhood. But this marriage didn't come with any sense of permanence. After just a few months, Dougherty enlisted in the Merchant Marine. He left Norma alone, facing a whole new set of challenges. With her husband at war, Norma was left to fend for herself, and she found work at a factory, assembling airplane parts as part of the wartime effort. At this point, she wasn't thinking about fame or the future. She was just trying to get by. But life had other plans for her. While she was working at Radioplane Company, a photographer capturing images of women workers for the war effort spotted her. There was something about Norma Jean that the camera loved, something natural and captivating. She had no idea that this moment, this simple snapshot, would be the start of something massive. The photographer's pictures of her made waves, catching the attention of modeling agencies and setting her on a path she never expected. This factory job wasn't just a paycheck anymore. It was her first step into a world that would soon know her as Marilyn Monroe. That spark the photographer saw? It would ignite a fire, pushing Norma Jean into the limelight. The birth of Marilyn. The factory worker became a model, and then the model transformed into Marilyn Monroe. But don't picture a magical Hollywood makeover. It was more like an assembly line. Marilyn Monroe didn't just appear, she was crafted. Hollywood had plans for Norma Jean, and it involved her shedding her true self piece by piece. Her hair was dyed platinum blonde, and her voice and walk were coached. Her name, once ordinary, was swapped for one that would gleam in lights. The quiet, shy girl with a troubled past was now hidden under layers of glamour and allure. Marilyn Monroe was born, and Norma Jean began to disappear. This reinvention wasn't about showcasing Norma's real talent. Hollywood didn't want authenticity. It wanted a marketable image. So Marilyn was cast as the dumb blonde, not once, but again and again. She starred in roles that made her the punchline, the eye candy, the ditzy blonde. They were fun parts for the audience, but to Marilyn they felt restrictive, even demeaning. She saw herself getting boxed into this role with no room to breathe or prove she had depth, but at this stage, she was in no position to push back. Marilyn knew that to survive in Hollywood, she had to play along, at least for now, and so she became the character Hollywood needed her to be. Though keeping her real self hidden behind a carefully crafted persona, she smiled, she dazzled, she charmed, she became everything the studios wanted. What the world didn't see was that this dumb blonde routine was just an act. Behind the scenes, Marilyn was a woman desperate for respect, for a chance to show her complexity. She saw that Hollywood adored her as an icon but dismissed her as a person. It was a frustrating paradox. The price of fame. With each new role, Marilyn's star power grew. By 1953, she was Hollywood's blonde bombshell, the glamorous, bubbly beauty that fans adored in films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire. She'd perfected the art of playing the vivacious, clueless character, all charm and sparkle. The audience loved it, but for Marilyn, it was just that, an act. Behind those bright eyes and dazzling smile was a woman struggling with insecurity and a gnawing sense of hollowness. Marilyn felt boxed in, trapped in a role that mocked her intelligence and downplayed her worth. She was tired of being Hollywood's dumb blonde, a character that audiences laughed at but rarely took seriously. Each role chipped away at her confidence, left her feeling like a puppet on display. Hollywood wasn't just typecasting her, it was reducing her to a one-dimensional figure. It denied her the chance to show the real person beneath the surface. She saw how easily the industry could treat her like a product, not a person. She once said, "They'll pay you $1,000 for a kiss and 50 cents for your soul." It was her way of calling out the brutal truth. Hollywood saw her as a commodity, something to be used and discarded. To the studios, Marilyn was less a person and more a brand, a sparkling name on a marquee, but not someone whose inner life or struggles really mattered. This wasn't just a feeling, it was her reality. She was paid for her looks and for her charm. But what she craved was respect, the chance to be seen as a serious actress with depth. Marilyn wanted the world to know that she was more than just a pretty face in a pretty dress. Breaking free. Marilyn wasn't about to let Hollywood keep calling all the shots. In 1954, she'd had enough of being treated like a commodity, so she made a bold move. She walked right off the set of The Girl in Pink Tights, demanding not only better pay but also creative control over her roles. This wasn't something actresses did back then, but Marilyn was done with playing by Hollywood's rules. In an industry that rarely let women steer their own careers, she took the reins, setting up her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions. This wasn't just a business decision, it was a statement. Marilyn wanted Hollywood to know she wasn't just another dumb blonde to be cast aside. She was a force to be reckoned with. Hollywood was shaken. For a female star to start her own production company was practically unheard of, and it made headlines. Marilyn was determined to create roles that challenged her, roles that let her show her depth and talent. She wasn't about to settle for being the pretty face that Hollywood paraded around. She wanted respect and the freedom to decide her own path, and she was finally taking steps to make it happen. Around this time, Marilyn's personal life was also making waves. Her marriage to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio had the public captivated. To everyone else, it looked like a perfect match, the glamorous starlet and the beloved sports hero. But behind the scenes, the fairy tale image quickly faded. DiMaggio admired Marilyn's beauty but couldn't handle her independence or fame. His jealousy and desire for a traditional wife clashed with Marilyn's ambitions. He wanted her to be his, but Marilyn had no interest in being controlled by anyone, not even her husband. After just 9 months, the marriage ended in a very public divorce. Irreconcilable differences, the papers said, but Marilyn's friends knew better. DiMaggio's jealousy and need to control her made her feel as trapped as she'd felt under Hollywood's grip. The intellectual pursuit. Determined to prove she was more than Hollywood's blonde bombshell, Marilyn packed her bags and moved to New York. She wasn't there for glitz or glamour. She was there to train, to study, and to be taken seriously. She threw herself into method acting. She trained at the prestigious Actors Studio under Lee Strasberg, who saw the potential behind her Hollywood image. This wasn't just a hobby for Marilyn, it was a transformation. She wanted the world to see her as a true actress, not just a pretty face. She was digging deep, challenging herself, and finding parts of her identity she hadn't fully explored before. Her personal life seemed to take a serious turn, too. She married Arthur Miller, one of America's most celebrated playwrights, in a relationship that, to her, offered something she hadn't had before: intellectual companionship. Marilyn wanted someone who could see beyond her beauty, someone who valued her mind. Miller seemed to offer exactly that. Together, they were a bit of an odd couple, a literary genius and Hollywood's brightest star. But Marilyn was drawn to the idea of being loved for who she was inside. Professionally, Marilyn's hard work paid off. She landed roles that allowed her to showcase her talent and depth, especially in films like Bus Stop and Some Like It Hot. Audiences saw a new side of Marilyn, a layered, vulnerable, and skilled actress who could deliver nuanced performances. She'd come a long way from her early roles, proving she could do more than play the ditzy blonde. Critics took notice, and so did her fans. It was a triumph, but behind the success, Marilyn was still wrestling with self-doubt. As much as she was growing, she felt the constant pressure of Hollywood's expectations. She had stepped away from the stereotype, but was still haunted by the fear that people wouldn't fully accept her new image. Inside, she battled anxiety and perfectionism. She felt torn between who she wanted to be and who the world wanted her to remain. Darkness behind the scenes. By 1960, Marilyn was known around the world. She was a superstar, an icon. But behind that glamorous image, her personal life was unraveling fast. Her marriage to Arthur Miller, once filled with promise, was on shaky ground. They had started out as intellectual partners, but by now, their differences had started to pull them apart. Marilyn wanted stability and understanding, but Miller struggled to support her under the intense pressure and scrutiny that came with her fame. The relationship that was supposed to give her a sense of identity was only adding to her loneliness. To cope with the relentless pressure, Marilyn had begun relying heavily on prescription pills. She used them to battle her growing anxiety and chronic insomnia. She had always been a fighter, known for her energy and feisty spirit, but by now, those qualities were fading. The once vibrant woman was starting to feel like a shell of herself, being weighed down by the expectations of Hollywood and the constant need to perform. Fame was taking a toll on her body and mind, leaving her increasingly fragile and exhausted. Adding to her struggles, Marilyn went through multiple miscarriages during this period. She had longed for a family of her own, a sense of connection that fame could never give her. But each loss deepened her depression, leaving her feeling even more isolated. Hollywood saw only the glamorous Marilyn Monroe, but no one seemed to see the woman behind the image, someone who was hurting, struggling, and just trying to hold it all together. In moments of vulnerability, Marilyn confided in friends, saying, "I'm trying to find myself as a person. Sometimes that's not easy to do." She wasn't just talking about the pressures of fame. She was talking about the daily struggle to keep going, to find some semblance of stability in a life that constantly seemed to slip out of her control. Marilyn was fighting to stay true to herself, but Hollywood didn't care about her soul, only her beauty and marketability. Through it all, Marilyn was slowly disappearing. The world saw the icon, the image, but behind that dazzling smile was a woman falling apart. She had reached incredible heights, but the price of fame had never felt heavier. The desperation of something's got to give. By 1962, Marilyn Monroe was nearing her breaking point. She had been cast in Something's Got to Give, a film meant to revive her career. But it quickly became a nightmare. Marilyn missed several days of shooting, mostly due to health issues. She was physically worn out, mentally exhausted, and completely burned out from years of relentless pressure. But the studio executives didn't care about her well-being, they just saw a problem. The media jumped on the story, painting Marilyn as unreliable, unprofessional, and washed up. There was little sympathy for her struggles behind the scenes. The tabloids had a field day, turning Marilyn's difficulties into a spectacle. They ignored her ongoing battles with anxiety and insomnia, her struggle with physical health, and her exhaustion. To them, she was simply difficult, a fading star who couldn't keep up. But the truth was that Marilyn was drained, barely holding it together. Hollywood expected perfection, but Marilyn was far from perfect. She was human, and she was struggling. Adding even more fuel to the chaos were her connections to powerful men, particularly John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy. The tabloids couldn't get enough of the rumors swirling around her alleged relationships with the Kennedys, speculating wildly about the nature of her interactions with these political icons. There were whispers of secret affairs, and the public ate it up, fascinated by the potential scandal. The rumors were persistent and invasive, painting Marilyn's life as a soap opera, a public drama for everyone to consume. In reality, Marilyn's life was slipping further out of her control. She was stuck in a vicious cycle of scrutiny, exhaustion, and scandal, with no escape in sight. The world saw her as entertainment, as fodder for gossip. But no one saw the person underneath, the woman who was desperately trying to find stability in a life that was anything but stable. The high cost of vulnerability. In the final weeks of her life, Marilyn Monroe was more vulnerable than ever. She was isolated, exhausted, and desperately searching for real support. But instead of finding solace, she felt increasingly controlled by those around her. Her inner circle seemed more concerned with managing her image than offering her comfort. Her connections with powerful men like John and Robert Kennedy had only made things worse. It added layers of secrecy and tension to her already troubled life. Her dependency on pills and her ongoing conflicts with Hollywood left her feeling cornered and alone. Marilyn was caught in a loop of fame, pressure, and loneliness. She hinted to friends about how deeply her isolation affected her, confiding that the constant public attention was wearing her down. To the world, she was still Marilyn Monroe, the icon, the most desired woman on the planet. But behind the glamorous image, she was struggling to keep going. She was trapped in a life that was becoming increasingly empty. Hollywood had given her fame, but it hadn't given her happiness, only the pressure to keep up appearances. To those close to her, Marilyn's struggle was painfully clear. She felt that no one truly understood her or cared about her for anything other than her image. She longed for stability, for a sense of belonging. But she couldn't escape the chaos of her life. Marilyn was constantly searching for love, acceptance, and peace. But the harder she searched, the more elusive they seemed. It was a tragic reality. Marilyn was adored by millions, but felt completely alone. She wanted to be seen as more than a Hollywood fantasy. She wanted to be understood, valued, and cared for. But in those final days, she felt trapped, surrounded by people but truly isolated. The last cry for help. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Los Angeles home at just 36 years old. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, discovered her lying face down in bed around 3 a.m. Concerned after noticing the light was still on and Marilyn wasn't responding, Murray called her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who broke through a window to get inside. But by the time he reached her, Marilyn was gone. The official report ruled her death a probable intentional act due to an overdose. Toxicology results showed high levels of two sedatives she had often used to manage her anxiety and sleep issues. But almost immediately, questions started circulating. Was it really an overdose? And if so, was it intentional, or had she misjudged the dosage? Marilyn was struggling, yes, but she had recently been planning a comeback and had even scheduled meetings for the week ahead. Was she really at a point where she would take her own life? There were also some strange details about that night. First, reports say that her room may have been cleaned and items possibly moved before the police arrived. which didn't exactly fit with standard procedure. Eunice Murray, who was the only other person in the house, gave a few different versions of her account. But this only added to the suspicion, and there was no glass found in her room, even though she would have needed one to swallow all those pills, a fact that still raises eyebrows. And then there were her connections to some very powerful people. Marilyn was rumored to be close with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy. In some people's eyes, it placed her in a risky position. Some theories suggest that her death wasn't an accident, but rather part of a cover-up due to the sensitive information she may have known. Officially, the report lists her death as a likely intentional action. But without clear answers, the mystery has only grown. Marilyn's life was always shrouded in intrigue, full of hints and unspoken truths, almost as if she was trying to warn us all along. Her death mirrored that reality, leaving behind more questions than answers and solidifying one of Hollywood's most haunting mysteries.